I had interacted with Miss Morrison both formally and informally at this point for, more than 10 years. And it gets to the point where we've talked so much about this book, and she's very close friends with the person who's my mentor, Eleanor Traylor. And so I go to Dr. T's for this New Year's open house that she usually has like from 10 in the morning until like 10 the next morning. Oh, and she says, she sends me upstairs for something that she knows that Morrison's up there. So she's also like going to surprise me. And I go, oh, gee whiz. So now I'm in the position where I'm actually trying to dodge Toni Morrison. And that's the beauty of my life at this point, that I am trying to avoid a writer that I'm working on because I've not made as much progress as I wanted to make.
Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today I am joined by Dana A. Williams. Dana is a professor of African American literature at Howard and the author of the brand new book, Toni at Random, the iconic writer's legendary editorship, which chronicles Toni Morrison's time as an editor at Random House and her long-lasting impact on publishing. Today, Dana and I discuss Toni Morrison as a writer and an editor. We also talk about why Dana chose God Help the Child as our July book club pick. And we get into some of the Black classics that are a little bit less well known that Dana thinks you and I should read. Quick reminder, everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. And if you love this podcast and you want inside access to it, you can head to patreon.com/thestacks and join the Stacks Pack. And you can check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. By joining either of those places, you're going to get yourself some exclusive content like bonus episodes, our mega reading challenge, and you get to know that you're making it possible for me to make the Stacks podcast every single week. Okay. Now it is time for my conversation with Dana A. Williams. All right, folks. You know I have been very excited about this book all year. I know you are very excited about this book. It is finally here. And today on The Stacks, I get to talk to the author, Dana A. Williams, of the brand new book, Toni at Random, the iconic writer's legendary editorship. Dana, welcome to The Stacks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'm so excited. So you're here this week. We're going to talk about your book. We're going to talk about your taste in reading. At the end of the month, you will be back. We are going to discuss God Help the Child for our annual Toni Morrison Read Book Club, but we will get to that later. For now, I want to start where we always start, which is, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your reading life? Where did you grow up? What brought you into books? What's your relationship to reading? Just a little bit of that.
Sure. I grew up in North Louisiana in a small town called Tallulah. Okay. And one of the things I remember most fondly about that time is just the space to be able to read at will. I joke often, my father built houses for a living, among a number of other things, because in that small town, everybody had to do a little bit of everything. But he renovated our house that we grew up in, and I begged and begged and begged for a window seat. And I knew he could make me a window seat. We couldn't figure out exactly how this would work because even as a kid, I was pretty tall. So, and the window space just wasn't big enough for me to stretch out completely, but I was convinced I could sit on a cushion with my knees up. And somehow he conveniently forgot every year to build me a window seat.
Dad.
I know, right? No, I know now that he and my mother were convinced that I would never leave the house if I had a window seat. Now, it did have a window, so I would have been able to look out to the playground where people were across the field, which is really close to where I went to elementary school. But I think it was intentional in retrospect. I think they decided this kid will never leave the house if we build her a window seat, because I was indeed that person who read all the time, as much as I possibly could, had really great librarians. That's why libraries are just so important in public schools, because I got all of my first books from my school library and then from the parish, the local library. So I've been a reader for as long as I can remember. I don't ever remember there not being an experience without books, which may be why I have far too many books in my house right now.
Yeah. Do you have a window seat now? When you became an adult, did you get a window seat?
I have what is the functional equivalent of a window seat, but I did not. And I just actually, interestingly enough, moved, and there were a couple of things that I thought, like, as long as there's great open space for windows. So now instead of a window seat, I have a whole window room. I have a whole reading room. Instead of just a seat, there's a room full of my books and full of great light. So there's a sunroom. So that's why I say it's the equivalent of a window seat. It's even better.
It's better. It's an upgrade.
Yes.
Take that. I love this. You are a professor.
Yes.
And I mean, you get to talk about books all the time now. How did that change your relationship to being a reader, like becoming what I like to call a professional reader, among other things?
That's interesting that you should ask that question, because I actually started my undergraduate career as a computer science major.
Oh.
Which again, my parents are delightful people. They just let me go along with this as if I was going to actually be a computer science major. And once I changed to English liberal arts, I said, why did you all let me do this? And well, you have to come to these things, this kind of awareness by yourself. So no one was surprised that I really should have always been an English major, but I was just determined that I was not going to do what I did really well. I wanted, interestingly enough, in undergraduate school, I wanted to be able to work at the time. I was at Grambling on something that I wanted to see some level of improvement. I almost thought, like, kind of casually, I do that all the time. I can do that rather effortlessly. And then I shifted a little bit from just thinking about reading as a profession to thinking about writing as a profession. Okay. And as, the world would have it, there was not a rhetoric and composition program that really focused on the way that we think about African-American literature, vernacular, English. Programs are just much more robust and extensive and culturally sensitive now, but at the time they weren't. So I did English, started out really thinking about theater. I was convinced that I was going to either be a dramaturg or a theater critic. So I worked on Black women playwrights. And then I shifted to fiction, which was my first love to begin with. Okay. And it's really tough for me not to read with a pencil behind my ear, because I am thinking about notes. I'm making notes in the margins and having these conversations all the time. I'm a lot better about it now, because sometimes I'll read on my iPad instead of the hard copy, but overwhelmingly, I still see myself both casually and professionally as a professional reader. So I am so glad that you have given me that nomenclature.
Yes. Well, you are definitely one. I love that do you ever delineate in your mind between reading for work and reading for pleasure, or are you always sort of doing both?
I do delineate for reading for pleasure. And sometimes it gets me in trouble because my relief for myself during that sweet spot of the semester, classes have ended, but exams haven't begun, or I haven't gotten final papers. That's when I'm okay, I'm going to read the books that I want to read. I have fallen in love with Stacey Abrams and all of the books that are a part of her series, especially the Avery Keene. I have been a long John Grisham reader. I read all of the Alex Cross by James Patterson. So there are books. I love Sunny Hostin. There are books that I see as these are for pleasure. I'm going to read them rather quickly, and I don't imagine that I'll teach them at some point. But then there are those that are a little bit more slippery. I just love Tiari Jones. I love Edwidge Danticat, and I'm reading those because I really want to read them, but eventually they make their way to my syllabus. Same thing. Jericho Brown comes out with a new collection of poetry, and I'm going for it immediately. And then I think, where can I construct a class to teach this book? It's so critical. Yeah.
You mentioned theater, and, I read your book, and I had always had this sneaking suspicion about Toni Morrison that she loved Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. She writes in her fiction some of the best scenes. And there's a few scenes in my reading that I was like, gosh, this reminds me of Macbeth, or gosh, this reminds. And in your book, I found out that she was maybe going to be an actress, and that she played Queen Elizabeth in Richard III, one of my all-time favorite roles. And I wanted to say thank you to you, because you gave me, I feel like I figured something out. I think I'm sure if I had researched, I could have found out that is a fact about her. But I was so excited reading her book. I was taking notes on that. I was like, what Shakespeare parts was she?
But it's kind of buried. You're right. So I appreciate your lifting it up. She says often in interviews, or she would say that the time that she remembered most fondly at Howard was her time in the theater. And that really just led me to try to figure out what was so enjoyable about it, or who were the people that she worked with, or what were some of the plays. So I went down my own rabbit hole, and it ends up in the book for nerds like me and you, in the sense that it's not completely relevant to her being an editor, except it kind of is, because I think it informs her artistic journey overall. Yeah. And very clearly learning how to write a scene, how to write a scene for it to be viewed, and that active engagement, the participant in her reading, I think are functions of her time. And then what she does with voice. Yes. So one of the little holes I went down, made it clear that everyone who worked in theater at the time that she was with the Howard Players also took courses in elocution. So voice was so important. Sound was absolutely important. I think those are some transferable creative exercises that we do see both in her writing and in her ability to hear that for other people in their writing when she was an editor.
I love that you said the elocution, because I've also long thought that obviously Toni Morrison has one of the great minds, but one of the things that I think has allowed her to feel and be so relevant is the video clips where we get to hear her voice and the way she manipulates her voice when she's making a point, and the way that she leans into the long vowel sounds and the aggressive staccato of her consonants. It's not an accident. You are not born. There are many, many smart, amazing writers who cannot and do not do that. And I've always thought that was a part of why she still is so meaningful to us now. And we still see her video clips all the time, because not only is she saying brilliant things, but she's saying them in brilliant ways.
Yes, her sound, and also how to use her body as a performer.
Yes.
Really does speak to, and I would agree with you completely, beautiful mind there, but there are so many people who have similarly beautiful minds who cannot perform that brilliance and that genius in the same way that she's able to. And she worked with the best of the best.
Yeah.
I mean, Anne Cook, James Butcher, Owen Dodson. And Dodson, of course, we know from Broadway, but in HBCU circles especially, Anne Cook and James Butcher and John Lavelle were these really incredible creatives who were old school actors. It just reminds me of the way that people who were trained for the stage think about the difference between something on stage and something in the movie. Just saw Othello this past weekend, and just thinking about how Denzel Washington said, I really prefer the stage. That's home for me. I prefer that over these movies. And you walk away from his performance thinking he had to do 8 of these a week, and it requires the stamina, but it requires a kind of believability and an ability to do things with your voice and with your body to be more convincing. I agree with you completely. One of the reasons we are just so smitten by when we see her performances on video.
Yeah.
I mean, she's just camera friendly, but also because she knows what to do with her voice. She knows how to create a scene. She knows how to tell a story. She knows when to get the, kind of audience participant, whether it's the reader or a live performance, how to bring them in, how to go up with volume. All of those things I think are functions of her time on the stage.
And it's clear to me that she has an extreme interest in audience. I mean, that comes out in your book too, when she's talking to her authors and we get to hear from her and the notes back and forth. And, when she's talking about titles, it's so clear that audience is something that is at the front of her work as an editor. And I think from reading her novels and her nonfiction as well, and watching those videos, she always knows where that camera is. She always knows who she's talking to, what she's doing to the people that she's trying to impact. And I think, it's genius level.
Yep. And for those writers that she was able to select, those are the very qualities that she was looking for. Who's talking to the audience and what are they saying?
Yeah.
Who's leaving some space for the reader and like who's too tight and how can I loosen it up? There were some writers that she absolutely recruited, but then there were, of course, those books that were either assigned to her or that she accepted that didn't meet what we might call like a Morrison aesthetic. But you can definitely see those that she went after were those that did really understand audience and how to bring the audience into the space.
One of the things that is very clear in your book is how Toni Morrison impacted the authors that she worked with. Did you get a good sense of how those authors impacted her or her own work as a writer herself? Was that ever made clear to you?
Yeah, I think so, in ways that I was able to speculate about. And then one of our early conversations, we talked about it a little, in part because when she talked about Leon Forrest, for instance, as one of the fiction writers and the first male fiction writer that she edited, she talked about how he taught her to write the sermon. So I can't think of Baby Suggs and The Clearing and Beloved now without thinking about how much she admired Forrest as a writer who wrote sermons in what he referred to as his Bloodworth trilogy. There's a Tree More Ancient Than Eden, The Bloodworth Orphans, and Two Wings to Veil My Face. And there's a character, Sweetie, who essentially sermonizes and reminds me a little bit of a Baby Suggs-like character. She talked about this often in interviews, how naming Sweet Home in Beloved was an homage of sorts to Henry Dumas, whom she had edited but never met because he was actually already deceased as an ancestor when she begins to edit his fiction to bring it back out into print again. There are these really cool moments where you see her dropping these recipes into books. And that's a kind of back and forth give and take in the sense that she had edited this cookbook called Creole Feast, where the chefs basically did what all chefs do when they don't really want you to get the recipe perfectly right. They just tell you all of the ingredients, but they don't tell you, like, if you don't put this butter in at room temperature, you're in trouble.
Right.
And as a cook, she was able to take those recipes, which these really incredible chefs in New Orleans had used all of their lives. And of course, they weren't working from a recipe. So then they're also experimenting, trying to figure out, is this like, what's a pinch?
Right.
What's a little bit? What's until this color? So she has to actually put narrative around these scraps of paper and recipes that she gets, like, if I put this in this book this way, I'm in trouble. But learning how to talk about recipes also, I think, shows up in some of her work as well. And the most obvious example, of course, is the work that she does on the Black Book as an editor, then gives her the inspiration for the Margaret Garner story in Beloved. So there is some give and take. And talking about Gail Jones as a writer, I think Gail Jones's boldness and her unwillingness to kind of neatly close things, I think gives Morrison another kind of level of confidence to be able to do it. Not that she couldn't do it absent Jones, but to create this kind of expectation in fiction that reveals life as something that doesn't just get closed up neatly with a bow.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you in the beginning what happened. And then I'm going to spend the whole novel like walking you through like, all of the details. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Totally. Okay. So part of your process in making this book, you've been working on this book actively, or at least you started the interviews 20 years ago?
Almost. First interview, I think, was, now I can't remember if it was 2005 or 2008. I'll tell you.
I think you said 2008 in the acknowledgments.
I thought 2008, but then when you said 20, I thought, like, was it 2005?
But sorry, I just sort of like said 20. It's not accurate.
It's
like
close.
17, close.
It definitely feels like it.
To be fair, you had the idea for this book even before that. So this book has been percolating in your mind for 30 almost years? Easily.
And
you interviewed Toni Morrison in 2008 the first time. You talked to her a few other times throughout the book, or throughout your process.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, was it difficult, or how important was it for you to get a full picture of her, which sometimes means including some unflattering pieces of her process, I would say. There are scenes in the book where I was like, ooh, Toni seems like not so nice. like that's not how I would like to be spoken to. And so I'm wondering, like, you're working on this thing. She's clearly a figure that is important to the work that you do as a professor of African American literature. Like, she is a figure, she is a figurehead, but also you're writing about her as a human. So how are you balancing sort of like, I've met this woman, I've spoken to this woman, but also I've got to get it all. I can't hold back on this.
Yeah, that was tough. I admit that I worried a little bit about it, not because I thought that she would try to influence the book, but there were some things where there was no explanation. Mm-hmm. And I would ask her for the explanation. And sometimes I got it and sometimes I didn't. So I would find, for instance, in the archives, titles of books that she clearly had worked on. And it started out as an interestingly, collaborative kind of process, right? Where I said, like, hey, here's the whole list. And we're initially talking and she's like, I don't know that I have a whole list of every book that I edited, but I'm going to work on getting one. And then I send her titles and then we kind of work on the list collaboratively. And sometimes she'd laugh and say, oh my goodness, I forgot about that one. And there would be other times where she would say, no, that's not my book. And I'm like, yeah, that's your book. Like, I have like 18 folders of correspondence that suggest that this is your book. And she's like, nope, not my book. And I'm like, why are you saying this isn't your book? Like, you have to tell me something. Is it that you inherited it from someone else? Because she was also very clear. Like, I didn't like every book. So let's be clear. Sometimes this was a job. This wasn't just, I get to pick and do whatever I wanted to do. So I was concerned at different points about what that process would look like how I would tell that story. And what I decided ultimately is to let the archive tell the story, to say, listen, there's correspondence that suggests that she worked on this, but she suggested otherwise. And then I think I relied so much on the goodwill that we had established as I was working through the process that it overshadowed like concerns I had about what levels of influence she might try to have. I was clear, and I think she was clear, that the book would be what it was and that I would tell the full, robust picture. She never intimated at all that she would want me to do anything except for that. But for sure, we talked about telling both sides of the story. So more often than not, I would see a copy of what she had sent to someone, and then I would see the copy that the person had sent in response. In those instances where all of those things weren't in the archives at Columbia, I tried to make the trip to wherever that person's archives were. So for the June Jordan correspondence, I made sure that I saw June Jordan's work at Harvard and Morrison's work so I could tell that story in two ways, because that was one of those kind of contentious back and forths. For Toni K. Bambara, which was a beautiful relationship, I also went to Spelman to see if I missed anything from the archives that were, Random House's archives at Columbia. But then there were also those moments where I had to rely completely on Morrison because there was no correspondence, because in the end, when they were nearing completion, where there would be like small little details that are back and forth, Bambara would stay there, or Bambara lived in Manhattan and would just come to the office. So all of those things were a part of the process for like trying to make this book in a way with a level of integrity and transparency. And I try to be very transparent, which is like why that kind of non-traditional acknowledgments that was trying to be a chapter, but didn't really want to be a chapter either. So it was like either going to be a postlude. And there's this beautiful thing that Toni K. Bambara does, I think for maybe Gorilla My Love. She calls it a sorta preface, like SORTA. And that's why I was like, this is a sorta acknowledgements.
Yeah, that's
because the transparency
they are sort of acknowledgements. I noticed that because I love to read the acknowledgements, and I was like, first of all, these acknowledgements are long, and I always flag that when it's not someone's first book. Because usually if it's your first book, you write really long acknowledgements, but the more books you write, it's sort of like, okay, thanks to the archive, thanks to the librarians, thanks to my partner and my family, love you, bye, editor, gotta go. And yours, I was like, this is like 10 pages. I was like, what's happening in here? I was like, something's happening here. So people, when you read the book, don't skip the acknowledgements.
Don't skip the acknowledgements.
It's important information in there. Okay, how about this question about Toni Morrison? Did you get a sense of how she was different or the same as other editors of the time, because so many of the things that come up in the book, like, helping with the title or talking about what kind of press the person should do for their book, all of that to me feels very much like what editors do today and now. And that's the world that I'm familiar with. But in the 70s and 80s, was some of this stuff different? Was she trailblazing, or was she just doing the job of an editor? And that's just the job of an editor.
I think a little bit of both. So there were not as many editors who had to work in multiple spaces as Morrison, in part because there weren't that many Black editors.
Right.
So the work that she had to do to make sure that she kept a firm footing in the Black world, so she would know which Black magazines, which Black book review critics she needed to engage, which Black academics she needed to engage, because she was also clear that book adoptions made like a very big difference. And because she didn't have a list, as a new editor, she had to rely on friends to say, who's got some really great manuscripts out here? And so those HBCU circles were so critical. So most white editors didn't have that as a thing that they also had to do. But then there was also the matter of interpretation, where she wanted to make sure that what she was trying to convey in a book showed up in the cover design. So, there are these periods when she jokes about, the design team, like wanting her to go away because they're the book designers. Like, right? I'm designing this book. This is my job. I understand it. And what you would typically see would be almost like an editorial fact sheet where you say, this is what the book is about. This is what you want to try to convey. And she was that type of person who was really like, you got to read the whole book, or let me tell you what this book needs to do. And then also you need to make sure that this book doesn't look like another book that I had, because she was aware of the fact that, Black writers were going to be either pitted against each other or lumped together. And she wanted to ensure, especially for those Black books, books by Black writers, that she had that separation so everyone could get the kind of attention that they needed to get. But the thing that I think distinguished her the most was the fact that Random House still ran their acquisitions by committee. So almost everywhere else, you had to convince people to let you acquire a book. Whereas at Random House, and I said by committee before, I should have said not by committee.
Right.
If an editor liked the book, the editor could say, here's what I think this book can do. Here is the idea for it. Here, I have a table of contents and a couple of sample chapters. Here's the market. And she had the kind of freedom to be able to do that. And then she also had the benefit of being a high profile writer. By the time Song of Solomon is released, she has a reputation as a writer that is really doing a lot of work for Big Random, even as she's publishing at Little Random. So
for people who don't know, Big Random is Random House, the publishing house, and Little Random is Random House, the imprint.
That's right. So she's at Knopf.
Yeah. She's publishing as a writer at Knopf, which is Big Random, under the Big Random umbrella, but she's editing at Little Random.
And how unique was that for her to have an editor on one floor and then she is actually editing on another floor?
That's so crazy.
So there were some things that she was able to do that made her a unique editor. And then otherwise, when it just came to the kind of questions that you ask as an editor to make sure that things are as solid as possible were, I think, fairly typical of this was editing in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So Toni Morrison came up with the title for this book.
Yes.
Can you tell us that story? It's in the acknowledgments, but I loved it. So will you tell us?
I will. I'm happy to. I had interacted with Ms. Morrison both formally and informally at this point for, more than 10 years. And that's the story of the book. And in the sense that when I started it, I thought I'm not quite ready to do this full time because I am doing some other things. And I had become chair of English at the same time. And, I was involved with the College Language Association. So I'm, naively thinking I can do everything. I'm under 40, 45. I'm superwoman, like rude awakening, right? So it gets to the point where we've talked so much about this book and she's very close friends with the person who's my mentor, Eleanor Traylor. And so I don't think it's an exaggeration that I was probably with them 4 or 5 times a year.
Okay.
And because I was so close to Eleanor and they were such good friends. Typically, they were thick as thieves. So they were like always together. So it gave me this kind of informal opportunity where if she said something about the book to me, then certainly I'm going to talk to her about it. Or if I could tell that she was in a particularly good mood and I had some questions that I wanted to ask, I would. So she knows what's happening with the book. I go to Dr. T's for this New Year's open house that she usually has like from 10 in the morning until like 10 the next morning. And she says, you know, she sends me upstairs for something that she knows that Morrison's up there. So she's also like going to surprise me. And I go, oh, gee whiz. So now I'm in the position where I'm actually trying to dodge Toni Morrison. Like, and that's the beauty of my life at this point, that I am trying to avoid a writer that I'm working on because I've not made as much progress as I wanted to make. This is why I told the story before about like all of these other things are happening in my life. And she said, so how are things going? Like, you know, we make small talk. We do the Happy New Year. Like, how's this? And then she brings up the subject, like, so how are things going with the book? And I'm embarrassed because it's not done and 10 years have passed almost. And I say, oh, I've come up with a title, because we had talked about titles before and how hard titles are and how she had gotten into arguments with writers about titles, and titles, you know, that's what, you know, gets the person to pick up the book. They look at the cover and then they see the title. So I'm like, I got the title, The House That Toni Built at Random. And she goes, smart, but too long.
Yeah.
So now I'm crestfallen because I got like my one victory
is that you have this title.
Yeah. My one victory is now I don't have a title apparently. And then she just sits quietly for probably 3 or 4 seconds. And she says, Toni at Random. And I go, Toni at Random. And she says, Toni at Random. And we kind of look up in the air and we look around, Toni at Random. And we're testing it out to see whether or not it has this kind of rhythm. And we both realize that it has a Toni at Random. And then I go, wait a minute. I can't call you Toni because I can't call you, you know, I'm bumbling, you know, like Miss Morrison, like I can't do. I said, so you're telling me I can call you Toni? And she says, Chloe doesn't have the kind of ring or something like that. Like, Chloe, well, no one would know if you said Chloe.
Yeah.
And we laugh. And so at that point I say, okay, Toni at Random. So I stuck with it, even as like some of my friends who are writers are saying, your editor's not going to let you keep that. It's an insider's title. And this is an insider's book. Yeah.
Did your editor push back?
No.
I was going to say, I think it's like one of the best titles this year. I mean, I think the package, the title and the cover.
Yes.
They do what needs to be done. Like, I don't think there's a question, because also I don't know that people are picking up this book unless they know who Toni is. Do you know what I mean? Yes. It's not like this is a book that like someone random is going to be like, oh, I saw this book and it was called Toni at Random and I was really curious about, like, it's for people who know who Toni Morrison is. It's for people who love Toni Morrison. And so it's not, anyways, not to jump in.
I thought it was going to be pushback. And I, for sure, they said, no, this is an insider's title. And I said, well, we'll do the work with the cover. And then I said, well, I'm open to thinking about other titles, but let me tell you why. And once I told them the story, they were like, oh, this is easy.
Yeah. You can't.
This is easy. Yeah,
you're gonna just disregard Toni Morrison's title.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to edit
Who are you again?
Book about editorship. Yeah. The funny thing about the cover though, too, is I felt like some of the writers, as I was working with the design team, I thought like, I am not going to be that person. I am not going to argue. These people know their jobs. They do it really well. And then when I saw the first cover that they sent to me, I said, no.
I tell authors all the time.
Dead on.
Yeah.
Like looking in the eye. Yeah. And she has to dominate the cover and we'll figure out how to work the editorial stuff. So thanks to the cover design team for like the chalk red at encircling the editorship.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Valentine's Day is upon us and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we are back. I did not prepare you for this, but we do something here called Ask the Stacks, where someone writes in and they're looking for a book recommendation. They tell us a little bit about their reading life, and then we have to give them 1 to 3 recommendations. So I'm going to read this now.
All right.
It comes from Nichelle, and they say, much like yourself, much like me, I enjoy nonfiction. Give me a memoir or a true crime, and I'm in. However, I have read so many of your book recommendations in these genres that I feel like there's nothing great left. And then she listed a list of like 20 titles. I just picked a few for you all. Heavy by Kiese Layman, Hunger by Roxane Gay, Eloquent Rage by Brittany Cooper, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. And they said anything similar to these titles would be great. So that's sort of not that helpful for you, Dana, because you probably don't know my entire nonfiction reading life. But if you can think of any great nonfiction, you can have a moment to think. I can give some of mine if that's helpful, if you want a second, or if something popped into your head, you can go first.
So you probably already have this one on the list, but it's relatively new. I do think Ta-Nehisi's The Message is still a great nonfiction read. The new book by Aaliyah Bundles, Joy Goddess, about Aaliyah Walker, gives us a different read of the Harlem Renaissance that we haven't seen, which I think is just a really great addition. And then for those writers out there, I am going to unfairly say the book How We Do It, which Jericho Brown edited, about craft and how to tell stories. I think those would be my 3 nonfictions. I don't think you can go wrong with either of those.
I love that. The second one you mentioned, I've never heard of, so I got to go look that up.
It comes out, and part of the reason it's coming out in a couple of weeks, if not this week, part of the reason that I know it is because I'm looking at kind of comp titles and just paying attention to books that are coming out as I'm reading blurbs about anticipation, kind of pre-release date for mine, and everything that Aaliyah Bundles has ever done, I've loved. Okay. So I've had a sneak peek at that, and I think this book, especially about the Harlem Renaissance and telling the story in a way that we haven't seen it before through the eyes of Aaliyah Walker. Love it.
Okay. So exciting. Okay. Here are my picks for you, Nichelle. First and foremost, on your long list, you did not include either Patrick Radden Keefe or John Krakauer. I talk about these men all the time. They're 2 of my faves. So if you have not read them, obviously that. But I feel like maybe you have and you just didn't include them, or maybe you didn't like them, which is fine. It's your business, not mine. So my 3 official recommendations. One is a book called The Girl Who Smiled Beads by Clementine Y. Maria. It's her memoir on her childhood, being a 6-year-old child who has to flee Rwanda during the genocide in the 1990s. So it is not true crime, but it is memoir, and it does have some of those intense elements that you know that I love. So that's one. The next one I would say is this book by Julia Shears that I've talked about a lot. It's called 1,000 Lives. It's about Jonestown, but it's told in a way that really focuses on the people who were victims of Jim Jones and his manipulation and his corruption. Talks a lot about the Black families that were involved, which often get erased from that story. And then the third one I have for you is a brand new book. It's called Welcome to the Dollhouse by Rich Cohen, and it's about the Jennifer Dulos story. I'd never heard of Jennifer Dulos. Apparently, this was huge news, like in 2019. I don't know where I was. I don't know what I was doing. I missed it. But she was a housewife in Connecticut. She was going through a contentious divorce. She drops her kids off at school, never to be heard from or seen again. The husband is arrested for the crime. He's got a girlfriend, a side piece, whatever. She's arrested too. It's very dramatic, but what I liked about the book is that he kind of goes back into Jennifer Dulos' story. She's from a Jewish family, very wealthy, a socialite, but she was also a playwright, but then kind of turned her back on the artistic side so that she could be a rich person. And it's really interesting about race and class. And I really enjoyed it. So those would be my 3 recommendations. If you read any of our books, let us know. And other folks, you can email us at askthestacks@thestackspodcast.com to get your book recommendations read on the air. Okay, back to you, Dana. We always start here when we get to the Stacks questions. 2 books you love, 1 book you hate.
Oh, that's the book I love. Easy. It's the one book that if I could only read one book for the rest of my life, it would be Ernest Gaines's The Lesson Before Dying.
Okay.
And quick story about it. I grew up in Louisiana, small town, almost uncritical of the political realities that we have. So when I read this book and I go, we really have to reconsider the death penalty. I literally become like an anti-death penalty advocate after reading this book. And then I have this conversation with Ernest Gaines about it over dinner. A friend in Louisiana, when I was teaching at LSU, knew that I loved Ernest Gaines, and we were having dinner. And I told him, like, the work that you do, that's anti-death penalty. And so he says, I never made a decision about that in that book. Like, you get to take from that book what you want to take from that book. He's, of course I am against the death penalty, but the book never insists. And I thought he's absolutely right. And the brilliance and the genius of that book with the way that he captures humanity is so critical that I read it as often as I can. So the book that I loved, easy.
2 books you love. You got to get me 1 more you love.
All right. Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God is probably the other one that I could read over and over again. I feel so strongly about what Hurston was able to do in that book that there's so many other books that would compete with it, especially like contemporary books. I love anything by Jesmyn Ward, anything by T.R.A. Jones. But I'll stick with those. Okay. Almost Mount Rushmore. Like you have to be deceased for me to have the conversation.
Okay. That's fair.
That saves me. And then I love Percival Everett.
Okay.
And so James would be pretty close on my list. Erasure would be on my list, high on my list. I can't love I Am Not Sidney Poitier.
Oh, okay. What is it about all that
of the
one?
Rest of I don't know. And that's
Are you saying this is your hate? Are you saying can't love is your hate? Are you doing the thing where you can't say that you hate a book? Because you can say it here. It's a safe space.
I want to say I can't love it. And I think it's because I will say I hated Sidney Poitier's biography.
Okay.
I just thought it wasn't good. I was disappointed in every way. Disappointed with the writing, disappointed with the editing, disappointed with the storytelling. I don't know what happened. And I'm wondering whether or not that book as biography disturbed me in such a way that I couldn't get even the fiction version. I couldn't get even the fiction version of it.
That's so interesting.
I'm going to go with Sidney Poitier instead of the Percival Everett.
Okay. We'll take it. Percival, you're off the hook. You mentioned that there's some recent authors that you love. What's the last great book that you read?
James.
It's
smartest book I read in 2024.
Yes. Agreed.
I can't even, because it's about Huck Finn, but it's not about Huck Finn. It's absolutely about James, like what he does with language and kind of philosophy of language and then storytelling and surprise. Like it's a book that's no longer the book that it's supposed to be about. Easily. Smartest book I read in 2024.
What are you reading right now?
I just finished Sunny Hostin's Summer on Highland Beach.
Okay.
Because I, was on vacation myself. And then I am reading for either work or pleasure or some combination thereof, Ruha Benjamin's Imagination, because I think imagination is just so important in the time that we're in. I think the way out of this kind of political fray that we find ourselves in really will be imagining in the same way that somebody thought that this should be a country established as a nation state. Yeah. We are going to have to think that this place can be something other than it is. So looking for some inspiration from books that really are about imagination and thinking about an alternate world.
Yeah, love. What are some books you're looking forward to reading? They don't have to be new books. It could just be things you've been wanting to get to, or they could be forthcoming titles.
I am embarrassed to say that I have not finished Honore's book on love songs. That's what it is.
Oh, the fiction.
Yes.
I have the new one right here. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's one I'm looking forward to reading.
Yeah,
the latest Honore Jefferson I'm looking forward to reading. But I also have to make sure that I finish the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. And I was moving through it fairly quickly. And it was right at the same time also that I was getting pressure from my editor, like, girl, get these pages in. So now I'm looking forward to, in the season where I am now doing promos for the book, to getting back to it. It's almost a reward that I've held out for myself to finish the love songs of W.B. Du Bois. I really enjoyed and want to reread Jamila Minnick's Moonrise Over Jessup. Mm-hmm. It's almost an unfair question because I read for the Stone Book Awards.
Oh, what's that?
And the Massachusetts Historical Association, their African American Museum, has a competition where all African American literature and culture books can be submitted for an award. And it's the largest prize. It's $50,000. It's the largest prize for a nonfiction book in African American literary and cultural studies. And I have about 25 books that I have to read.
Got it.
So I want to talk about them, but I'm not supposed to.
Okay. I will not push you. What is a book you love to recommend to people?
Song of Solomon. Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, I think, is beautifully done, a great story. I think in terms of teaching, it's my favorite to teach. I think Paradise is her best book.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, Dana. We do one Toni Morrison book a year on this podcast since the inception, since 2018. Mm-hmm. We're doing God Help the Child. It is the 8th book. It'll be our 8th book that we're doing. It's her last novel that she wrote. I gave you an option for God Help the Child, mm-hmm. Paradise, Home, and Love, because those mm-hmm. are the remaining 4. And you picked God Help the Child. So tell me why you picked this and not Paradise.
I picked God Help the Child because I think it's easier to talk about. She said it was the one that was the hardest to write. So I accepted that challenge because she hadn't done a contemporary voice before. I also think it bookends The Bluest Eye very well. I read it as beauty becomes what Pecola could have been.
Okay.
Under a different set of circumstances. I think Paradise is her best work because of its really sophisticated critique of American exceptionalism. Okay. So for a broad public audience, I thought God Help the Child is one that's accessible, but also has a really rich kind of story. As a scholar, I've written about Paradise and A Mercy as these kind of anti-America mm-hmm. exceptionalism books. Mm-hmm. So I just think they're more accessible.
Okay. I'm just so fascinated by that because usually people pick whatever one is their favorite that's left, I guess. I don't know. I hate to say it like that.
It was a tough. Courtney at HarperCollins and I did, we had a long conversation about whether or not I should do Paradise or God Help the Child.
I just assumed you would do Paradise because to me, that was of the 4 left, that's the one people talk about the most. So when you said God Help the Child, I was like, okay, I love Dana. I don't know what she's up to over there, but there's something going on that I'm very excited about.
That was it. That was literally if she accepted the challenge of writing this contemporary book, then what would be the challenge for me to think about it in a way that hasn't been talked about before?
Okay, so then let me ask you this now back. You've now told us the one that you think is her best, which is Paradise. You've told us the one that you love to teach the most, which is Song of Solomon. Which one is your personal favorite?
Beloved.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Beloved, in part because Setha gets to come into herself in such a beautiful way. One of the things that I loved about Morrison that I also think is true of Toni K. Bambara is a belief in community in such a way that you don't have to kill the men. The men aren't bad. And that's how I grew up and that's how I live my life. I am absolutely pro-woman, but I am so pro-Black people and Black institutions that books where we get to be in harmony and not over romanticize. But the fact that Paul D helps her to see herself in a way is so important to me. Because it could have been one of the women. It could have been anybody. But the fact that you have these Black men and Black women interacting with each other and they're not perfect characters. They make mistakes. They show the three-dimensionality of Black people. But I love what happens in Beloved, the self-awareness, and that the self-awareness can't come without a partner.
Yeah.
I just love that in a book.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that's not technically on the questionnaire. It's really more for me personally, but
right.
I've got you here and I'm going to do it. So one of my big goals this year in my personal reading life is to read more classics. The term I'm using is sort of loose, but part of the inspiration was actually Toni Morrison's lecture on goodness, because she talks about all of these books by like Charles Dickens and things that I just never read. And so I really wanted to focus on going back and reading canonical texts, I guess, if you will. You know, everyone defines their own canon, but it was important to me to not just read Black literature, right? Like I wanted to, I've never read East of Eden, and it felt like that's something probably Toni Morrison has read and has thoughts about, right? So I want to ask you, as far as Black classics go, what is a classic that you think people should read that's maybe slightly under the radar? So not Their Eyes Are Watching God, not Invisible Man, not Beloved, but something that you think is amazing that doesn't get the shine that it deserves.
Leon Forrest, Two Wings to Veil My Face is his most successful book, but it's also just a really beautiful read. It has like this kind of gospel music feel to it. It's got a story that you can maintain and sustain. It's got all of Leon Forrest's beautiful language and humor. So There's a Tree More Ancient Than Eden is his first novel, which is like highly experimental, that Ralph Ellison wrote the introduction to, and Ellison didn't blurb anybody. So the fact that Ellison loved this book, was just such a significant boon for Morrison as an editor. But it's not my favorite. Two Wings to Veil My Face is the Leon Forrest novel that I think should move to canon. Divine Days by Forrest is important, but it's 1,100 pages. You just can't. Yeah, you just exactly. You just can't.
It's not going to happen for me.
I wonder whether or not people are reading Percival Everett's Erasure as much.
We did
I
it
know
for
American
book club
fiction.
here
Yes.
2 years ago, or last year, like a while ago, almost years ago.
Erasure to me is a classic that is understudied. I'm trying to go a little bit earlier.
Okay.
I would say for the Harlem Renaissance period for poetry, I'm trying to diversify my genres here. James Weldon Johnson's God's Trombones.
Okay.
A beautiful reinterpretation of 7 biblical stories that he just gives. Like, we all know the creation story, Adam and Eve and the apple. Like, what James Weldon Johnson does with the creation is just like, it's almost like, there's this line in Paulins Dunbar, like when Melindy sings that, like everybody should just stop singing. Right.
It's done.
Everybody who thinks they can do something, like, just stop. That's how I feel. Like, King James ought to be shamed.
Right.
Because what James Weldon Johnson does with the creation, like, this should be the standard. So definitely James Weldon Johnson. And then I want to cheat a little and just talk more broadly about narratives of enslavement by non-Christian writers.
Okay.
All we get from the slave narratives or the emancipatory narratives, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Jacobs, like, all important, like, really important for us to think about for a number of reasons. But there were a number of narratives by Muslim writers where we see their stories differently told from the kind of standard abolitionist fare. So I would say all of the emancipatory or liberatory narratives about slavery by writers who were Muslim, like Ibn Said, so that we can begin to imagine what that period was like from a non-Christian perspective. It just changes the way that we read. So I want us to really think about that period of enslavement differently once we look at writers who are Muslim writers.
I love that. I'm so glad I asked. So glad I speared off the script.
Yes.
Okay, back to the script though. What's the last book that made you cry?
T.R.A. Jones's American Marriage.
What's the last book that made you angry?
A Very Short History of the Israel-Palestine Conflict.
Okay. What's a book that you feel proud to have read?
W.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction.
Good one. Okay. I'm sure you're going to tell me that you don't have this, but I'm going to ask anyways. What is a book that you're ashamed or embarrassed that you haven't read?
Moby Dick.
Oh, okay. Okay. I love this for you. Me neither.
Like, I feel like I should have, but I have not.
Me neither. It's okay. You're safe. That's a book a lot of people say that they hate. That's like the number one most hated book with the 2 books you love, 1 book you hate question. What is your problematic favorite book?
I feel like I got a lot of these. Problematic favorite is To Kill a Mockingbird and A Time to Kill.
Love
For
the
the
A Time
reason.
to Kill movie. Oh my gosh. I forgot about that. Is there a book you think people would be surprised to know that you love?
I think people are surprised about how committed I am to the Alex Cross series.
Okay. I was surprised when you were listing some of your pleasure reads. I was like, whoa, did not see this coming. So I think you're probably right. Okay, here's my last question for you. If you could require the current president of the United States to read 1 book, what would it be?
This is so hard because, like, will he really read it? But Black Reconstruction, but that's dangerous, right?
Yeah. It might be like a playbook for him.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. But what would I make him read? It would be Lolita Tadame's Red River, because I think he might actually read the fiction. It explains what happens when people who have been oppressed refuse to be oppressed any longer and they rebel. And people, it's about government, and it's based on a true story of the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana. It's an older book, maybe 10, 15 years, but it really is the book about what happens when Reconstruction doesn't work. People rebel. There will be violence. I might also get him to read that nonviolent stuff will get you killed. Because he needs to be clear that there is not a reality where people who are oppressed systemically will continue to take it. So it would be something that's a warning shot.
I love that. We're recording this right now. The week of the uprisings that are happening in LA. I live in LA. Yeah. So that reminder of like, we're not going to fucking take it.
Yep.
It feels extra on the nose this week. Yeah. I think it probably will feel on the nose when this episode airs the first week of July, but who knows? Right now, that's really hitting home for me. Dear listeners, you can get Toni at Random, the iconic writer's legendary editorship by Dana A. Williams, wherever you get your books. As you are listening to this, I read from the page. I also listened to the audiobook. She does it's not Dana, but I think her name is Deanna. Is that her name? Deanna? She does a fantastic job. I co-sign both ways of reading the book. So if you're not sure, the audiobook is a good option. Dana will be back on July 30th for our discussion of Toni Morrison's God Help the Child. Dana, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this and so many other wonderful books. I tell you, you got me thinking. And thanks for those recommendations.
Yes, thank you. And everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. All right, y'all, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you again to Dana Williams for joining the podcast. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Courtney Nobile for making today's episode possible. Remember, our book club pick for July is God Help the Child by Toni Morrison, which we will discuss on Wednesday, July 30th with Dana A. Williams. If you love the show and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack and check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And check out our website at thestackspodcast.com. Today's episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Waikia Freelo. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.